At the beginning of 1942, with the entry of the United States into World War II, the British High Command had reasons to feel optimistic that relief would finally come to their embattled island nation. Since 1939, Britain had to contend with an ever-increasing U-boat menace that was slowly but surely strangling her ability to wage war. By early 1942, the U-boats were carrying the war into the Western Atlantic with what seemed virtual impunity. The year before, the German Navy had sent surface raiders, such as the battleship Admiral Scheer and the battlecruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, into the Atlantic to perform successful attacks on Allied merchant shipping. In May of 1941, the German super battleship Bismarck performed a dramatic voyage. The crews of this 45,000-ton warship had terrified the Royal Navy, which finally managed to sink the monster, not before losing the battleship Hood in the process. By January of 1942, the British had learned of the existence of a second Bismarck-class battleship, the Tirpitz. Knowing the power, range, and speed of this unique class of warship, the British made it a top priority to keep the Tirpitz away from the Atlantic shipping lanes. The French port of Saint-Nazaire, located at the mouth of the Loire River in northwestern France, had the only dry dock big enough to accommodate a ship as large as the Tirpitz. The dock had been constructed specifically for the French liner Normandy. The Normandy dock operated two enormous caissons as lock gates. Each caisson was 167 feet long and 35 feet thick. Nearby winding houses operated the machinery necessary to open and close these massive lock gates. A pumping station near the southern end emptied and filled the dock with water. The British theorized that the destruction of the Normandy dock facilities at Saint-Nazaire would force the Germans to rebase the Tirpitz away from the French coast, and thereby prevent this powerful warship from menacing the Allied Atlantic shipping lanes. A raid on Saint-Nazaire also offered opportunities to disrupt German U-boat operations there. The Germans based their U-boats in bomb-proof armored concrete shelters. A section of these U-boat pens had been completed, and another one was under construction. These pens were almost impossible to destroy by air attack, and even by demolitions placed by commandos. But there was another way to seriously disrupt the U-boats without destroying the pens. If the lock gates that controlled the tidal action of the Loire River in the port's basins were destroyed, the harbor and therefore U-boat operations there would become susceptible to the tides, preventing U-boats from continuously entering and exiting the port. In January of 1942, the port was designated as a high priority target, and planning commenced as to the details of the raid. Because placing explosive charges by hand on each of the Normandy dock caissons while under enemy fire was a very difficult and time-consuming proposition, the planners devised the idea of ramming a destroyer full of explosives against the dock's southern caisson and then blowing it up. The ship chosen for this task was one of the 50 obsolete destroyers that the United States had provided to Britain under Lend-Lease, a destroyer formerly known as the USS Buchanan, now rechristened as the HMS Campbelltown. The Campbelltown was extensively modified for this raid. Her draft was reduced significantly to allow her to sail over the mudflats of the Loire estuary. Much of her armament had been removed, as well as two of her forestacks, giving the ship some resemblance to a German destroyer. 8 Oerlikon cannons were also installed, and armor plating was added along the bridge to protect the commandos that were being transported. Explosive charges were fitted inside the Campbelltown's bow, in areas not readily visible. After ramming the southern caisson, secondary explosive charges would be set off to scuttle the destroyer and thus prevent any recoil from the main explosion to reduce its impact on the target. Thus, the Campbelltown was to be sacrificed in this mission as a sailing bomb. The planners also decided to use a number of motorboats and motor launches to transport additional commandos, provide fire coverage, and bring the men back to England. The majority of these launches were Fairmile Type Cs, wooden launches barely suited for this task. To ensure that the launches could make the long voyage and return home, additional fuel tanks were carried on its decks, making these boats more susceptible to be set on fire if hit by German coastal guns. Added also to the flotilla were 4 motor launches armed with torpedoes, which could be fired at any targets of opportunity in the harbor. The men chosen to disembark and attack the port were elements of No. 2 Commando. Demolition teams were hand-picked for the mission, and they received intense training with varying numbers of quote-unquote casualties, so that every man would be proficient. There were also assault teams that were to provide protection to the demolition squads once on land. The plan also called for the use of various methods of deception. The British devised a diversionary air raid during the flotilla's approach to the port, thinking that the air raid would force the German defenses to concentrate their attention solely on the skies. In order to delay the inevitable German response to the raid, once the flotilla was inside the estuary, the Campbelltown would attempt to pass as a German destroyer. To this effect, a seaman aboard the destroyer was to make light signals in German to the river defenses. To buy even more time if necessary, captured German flares would be fired from the destroyer. The defenses of the port of St. Nazaire and its surroundings were indeed formidable. Shore batteries with guns up to 170 millimeters were present on both sides of the estuary. Searchlights and automatic weapons from 20 to 40 millimeters covered the approaches to the port. 4 harbor defense boats and 10 other vessels from the minesweeper flotilla were also docked in the harbor. In addition, the Germans had 6,000 men stationed in the port and surrounding areas, including soldiers of the 333rd Infantry Division. The British flotilla consisted of the destroyer Campbelltown and 17 motorboats and motor launches. The flotilla transported 10 demolition teams and 9 assault or protection teams. The flotilla sailed in a 3-column formation, each column transporting 6 commando teams, and each column was assigned a specific area of the port where to disembark its commandos. The first column, consisting entirely of the destroyer Campbelltown, was to sail straight ahead and crash into the southern Quezon. Commandos would disembark, and the crews would set off scuttling charges. Demolition commando teams would place explosives and blow up the southern winding station and the pump house. Other demolition teams were to rush to the northern end of the dock, place their charges, and blow up the northern winding station and the northern Quezon. Any targets of opportunity could be destroyed along the way back to the Old Mole, where the commandos would embark on the remaining motorboats and launches that would transport them back to England. Finally, the Campbelltown was to explode, taking with her the southern Quezon. The 6 motor launches of the port side column were to disembark its 6 commando teams on the Old Mole. The commandos were to make short work of the guns and searchlight there, and they were to rush through the old town towards their respective primary targets. The power station that fed electricity to the port's searchlight system was to be set with explosives and blown up, as well as the lock gates and swinging bridges that connected the St. Nazaire Basin to the new entrance of the port, that is, the Avant port. After destroying their primary targets, the commandos would look for targets of opportunity to destroy while rushing back to the Old Mole, where they would board any surviving motor launches and boats still there that would in turn take them back home. The 6 motor launches of the starboard side column were to disembark their commandos near the old entrance of the port. The commandos were to cross the swing bridge and move into the Normandy dock facilities, provide support to the Campbelltown commandos, while its demolition teams rushed to the swing bridge near the Penhoed Basin to blow up the bridge there. Afterwards, the commandos were to rush back in the direction of the old entrance. After crossing the swing bridge, demolition teams would also blow it up. Finally, the commandos were to head back to the spot where they were disembarked, or to the old mole, where surviving motor launches would transport them back home. It was truly a daring plan. And as it is common in war, not everything goes according to plan. The raid on St. Nazaire is about to begin.